All right, so I think we are going to begin. Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Worcester CPA Fall Funding Round Application Overview. My name is Jacqueline Burmeister. I'm the Community Preservation Manager for the City of Worcester, and my hope is that this session will guide potential grant applicants to learn what CPA is, eligibility for this funding and the application process, as well as have an opportunity to answer some of your specific questions related to the grant. CPA is a tremendous opportunity for community projects, and I look forward to see what projects get funded during this most current funding round. So there are some changes to this funding round compared to the pilot funding round that just happened in the spring. So I will make sure to highlight those here. But this session is being recorded and will be posted onto the city webpage. So you'll have the ability to watch it again later if you miss something. But I'm also taking questions. So at various points throughout the presentation, I'll open it up to questions. You'll be able to unmute. You could also, if you have a question in the middle of the section, feel free to put it into the chat box and I will answer it when we get to those points. So with that, we're going to jump right in. So the fall 2025 funding round is now open. This is our second round of funding. We had a pilot round for CPA funding. It was hugely successful. We had approximately $4.5 million that were awarded to 18 local projects back in March. Those projects are underway now. This fall, there are even more dollars for community projects, $6 million, and these are for all eligible projects related to historic resources, open space and recreation, and community housing. And during this presentation, we'll talk more about what types of projects are eligible under each of those categories. And really what's so exciting about these funds is that there are so few restrictions on who can apply so long as the project is eligible and provides public benefit to Worcester residents. So we'll talk even more about what those definitions are. I'm going to give you just a brief timeline here to put everything into context. We're going to revisit this timeline at the end of the presentation when we talk about the application process in a little bit more depth. But as of October 29th, last week, we have opened the pre-application on the City of Worcester CPP webpage. That's the Community Preservation Program webpage. It's going to be open for 5 weeks, and we're accepting these pre-applications on a rolling cycle. So on December 3rd, the pre-applications will close, and then everyone who was selected to submit a full application will have until January 7th to submit those full applications. Mid-January, the CPC, the Community Preservation Committee, is going to be reviewing those applications, and applicants will be selected to come to a public hearing when they'll have the opportunity to share their project with the public and the Community Preservation Committee. And those will happen the week of February 9th. The number of hearings will be dependent on the number of projects that are eligible and selected. And just, again, we'll go into what all this means later on in the presentation. But if you were to apply to CPA this fall funding round, you could expect to receive awards, or the money would be awarded by City Council in early March. So that would be the soonest that those monies would be available for the project. So that's just to create a little framework as we move forward. But what we're really going to be talking about during this presentation falls into 4 categories. We have some background on the Community Preservation Act. We're going to talk about what where the fund comes from, who the Community Preservation Committee is and what their role is, as well as what the Community Preservation Plan is and how it can assist you in your application. We'll talk about the project categories and minimum eligibility. What does it mean to be a community housing project or an open space project? And some examples of projects that have been successful in the past. We'll talk about how to apply those changes from the pilot round that we've implemented for this new round, as well as just the application process itself and what you can expect during each phase. And you'll begin to be able to prepare your application by knowing what documents you'll need to submit as part of that process. Finally, the last portion of this presentation is just talking about how applications are scored and ultimately selected by the Community Preservation Committee. It is the committee that ultimately selects which projects go to City Council for approval. And we'll talk about what they're keeping in mind when they're determining which projects are successful. So I'll start with a little bit of background on the Community Preservation Act, and then we'll pause for some general questions there, and then we'll move into eligibility. So the Community Preservation Act is a state law that basically establishes that any city or town can create a community preservation fund locally that can be spent on local projects related to those three funding categories: historic resources, community housing, as well as open space and outdoor recreation. So this is a really democratic process, because here in Worcester, we had to vote as residents in the November 2022 election to approve the Community Preservation Act here. And what we did was we approved a surcharge of 1.5% on top of our property taxes to go into this community preservation funds. That exempts certain properties that are qualify as low income housing or low to moderate income senior housing. And it's only after the first $100,000 of value. So this is 1.5% of the total property tax bill. So for a single family home, the average value, I think these average values are from 2023. The average single family home would be paying about $56 a year into the Community Preservation Fund. But so this fund, that is the major source of the income into this fund, but it also has a state match. So every year there is a state trust fund that's made up of fees that are on property transactions at the Registry of Deeds. All that money goes into this trust fund and is divvied up to all the CPA communities in the state. There are about 200 CPA communities in the state. And so last year we received about $750,000 to put into our Community Preservation Fund from the state. We also are able to accrue interest on that balance year over year, because that's the exciting thing about the Community Preservation Fund. It never goes into the general fund. This money could only and forever be used for community preservation projects. The revenue that we had in fiscal year 25 was $4.76 million, and we're estimating to have about $5.17 million in fiscal year 25. So that's pretty exciting. There are few restrictions on how we spend that money between the different categories according to state law. We are required to budget a minimum of 10% to each of those three categories every year. So that means that in fiscal year 25, we have to set aside $476,000 to outdoor recreation and open space, also to historic resources, and also to community housing. There's also 5% that we're allowed to put into an administrative fund. This is to fund things like, if you need to hire attorneys to draft documents, or if you have a staffer, or if you have food for community events that are related to the community preservation planning process, that could come out of the administrative fund. Any administrative funds that aren't used at the end of the year then get rolled back into the rest of the community preservation fund to be redivvied up. The remaining 65% of the fund can go to any of those three project categories. So theoretically, 75% of the revenue can go to any one of those three categories. And there's not really many restrictions on who can apply for this funding. It could be a 501c3, it could be an individual, it could be a for-profit organization, as long as the project is eligible and provides public benefit. So who makes the decisions about who receives this funding? So it is a grant program that is administered by the City of Worcester, but the folks who are actually reviewing the projects and selecting the projects are on the Community Preservation Committee. So this is a committee of 9 folks here in Worcester. They come from different committees throughout the city and bring their expertise that are related to these different categories. So we have a member from the Conservation Commission, the Historical Commission, the Planning Board, the Parks and Rec Commission, as well as the Affordable Housing Authority, or the Worcester Housing Authority Board of Directors. And so we have 1 member from each of those 5 committees, as well as 4 at-large members. So these are all residents of Worcester. They all live here and they all have a vested interest in seeing this money go to good use. And what they do is they review applications and they select those projects that go onto City Council for approval. They also prepare and annually revise the Community Preservation Plan, which we'll talk more about in a bit. And they prepare the application guidelines, which are already available on the City of Worcester webpage. The Community Preservation Manager, which is me, I kind of manage the program on the city side. I liaise and support the activities of the Community Preservation Committee and provide technical assistance to the committee as well as applicants like yourselves. I track the CPA funding and I ensure compliance. So if you have a question at any point, you can reach out to me via email, you could give me a call, and it's my goal is to make the process as easy as it is for you and to help you create the most competitive application for the CPC to review. So I've talked a lot about eligibility. Eligibility is something that is written into the Community Preservation Act state legislation. This isn't something necessarily that we could change here. And so there are certain rules around what types of projects we can award CPA funds to that in Worcester we cannot change. So CPA funds can only be spent on eligible projects. These criteria are funding category specific, and we cannot fund ineligible projects. We just are not able to. However, if a project is eligible, and there are a lot of eligible projects out there, the City of Worcester or the Community Preservation Committee may choose which eligible projects to fund. So if we have more projects to fund than we have funds to fund them with, there needs to be some kind of criteria to determine which projects get the funding. So these funded projects obviously should reflect the community's expressed needs and priorities. And these needs and priorities should be made explicit to all applicants so that when you're applying, you know what a competitive application looks like. So we'll talk the Community Preservation Plan. The purpose of the plan is to identify the goals and priorities of the community when it comes to how CPA funds are allocated to those eligible projects. So it outlines the goals and priorities of the Community Preservation Program. It also provides background information on CPA and describes the criteria and rationale for local project prioritization. So this document was created back in 2024, before our very first round of applications. And it was created after we reviewed 10 existing Worcester plans and documents, and we had over 40 local organizations that we interviewed in those 3 funding categories. We took kind of all of the things we were hearing from those organizations about what CPA priorities should be, and we presented them to the public in 3 public forums last December, as well as in an online survey to receive feedback from the public on if these values aligned with how they thought the Community Preservation Plan dollars should be spent in Worcester. We also had a public hearing on March 11th of this past year. So the Community Preservation Plan can be found on the City of Worcester webpage, the Community Preservation Program webpage, and it's a really great resource for you as applicants to really understand not just the eligibility requirements for different CPA projects, but also what the priorities of the communities are when the CPC is selecting projects. There's background on the Community Preservation Act, details of the whole process we use to figure out these core values and priorities, that general CPA eligibility. and then those goals and priorities, the criteria for project scoring, and then just basic application guidance. So before we get into the different project categories and minimum eligibility, does anyone have any basic questions on just what CPA is, where this money is coming from, and anything about the legislation? Open the chat here. Let's see if I can open the chat. Oh, so we have a question here from Ethan. Can individual schools or a school district apply? So this is a great question. Schools can apply. Depending on the project, there might be some restrictions on where the project can take place. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next section on eligibility. But yes, schools and school districts can apply, just making sure that the project itself is taking place in eligible space. And I guess an example of that would be if you're applying for open space and recreation, the space that's being used needs to have some kind of conservation or recreation restriction on it. And generally, school properties don't inherently have those spaces. And we'll talk more about what that is. It doesn't mean that they can't build a project there. It just means there might be an extra step into ensuring that that space where that project happens will not be turned into a parking lot in a couple of years. So we could talk more about that. And we, Ethan, if you have a more specific question on a specific project, we could also talk offline. All right. So I don't see any additional questions in the chat, and we'll move into project eligibility. So we have this handy chart here that we have used to help quickly identify if a project is eligible in each of the project categories. So along the first column, you see various verbs, and there are specific definitions for each of these verbs. And really, you shouldn't be trying too hard to push it into a category. The state, I guess, calls that verb shopping, but there are definitions if you have any doubts about what any of these verbs actually mean. Across the top, you have there's really 3 categories. They've divided it into 4 because there are slight differences between the monies you can use on open space and recreation. But acquiring is purchasing an asset, creating, preserving, supporting, rehabilitate, or restore in each of these categories. So you could quickly see from this chart that you can acquire a space for recreation, you could acquire a historic resource, but you can't necessarily create a historic resource or support recreational activities. These are capital projects. So really the only because housing is such an expensive endeavor, the only support activities that are eligible under CPA have to do with housing. So generally, we're looking at capital projects here. The only asterisks on these yes and no's come in the rehabilitate and restore section. For open space and housing, you can't generally rehabilitate or restore in these categories unless the asset or the property was purchased using CPA funds. So we'll go into a little bit more detail about what each of these categories are. So when we're talking about historic resources, we're talking about a building, structure, vessel, which refers to a boat, real property, document, or artifact that is either listed on the Massachusetts State Register of Historic Places, that's an online database, or if it's not a building or a property that's listed there, has been determined by the local historical commission to be locally historically significant. So anything that is not a property, if there's like an old fire truck that was used in Worcester, 100 years ago, and you want to preserve it, You just need to make sure that it is determined locally historically significant by the Worcester Historical Commission to be eligible for this funding. So when it comes to historic resources projects, you can acquire historic resources, you could preserve historic resources, or you could rehabilitate and restore historic resources. So here are a few examples. I tried in this portion to use the projects that came in our pilot round. We didn't have any acquisition projects in our pilot round for historic resources, but an example would be the acquisition of a historic stable by Boston to serve as an educational site about colonialism. So the Boston CPC approved $650,000 in 2023 to do that. Here in Worcester, in the spring, we awarded $45,000 to Mechanics Hall to preserve the portraits that they have hanging around Mechanics Hall. We also had a project to preserve the historic Belmont Church in Maine South through a partial roof replacement. So that was $278,000 awarded in the spring. When it comes to rehabilitation and restoration projects, there is a pretty cool project over in Hope Cemetery by the Friends of Hope Cemetery for about 50 grand with their matching funds to excavate and restore these historic gravestones from the 1700s and put them on display and create a guide to talk about the significant people that were buried originally in the common and then moved over to the cemetery when the common was turned more into recreational space. And then we had this historic restoration of the archtop windows and facade at the Worcester Art Museum, which is another project that was funded with CPA dollars. So does anyone have any questions about historic projects? I believe you should be able to take yourself off mute if you want to ask a question as opposed to type it. Let me know if that's not the case. Okay, I don't see anything, so I'm going to move on to our open space. So open space refers to land to protect existing and future well fields, aquifers and recharge areas, watershed land, agricultural land, grassland, fields and forest land, saltwater marshes, wetlands, pretty much any open space that you can think of to protect scenic vistas, wildlife or nature preserves, or even land for recreational use. So that's open space. When we talk about outdoor recreation, we're talking about active or passive recreational use, including but not limited to land for community gardens, trails, non-commercial and adult sports, as well as the use of land for a park, playground, or athletic field. There are a few exceptions here that are really important. One is that there can be no artificial turf purchased or maintained under CPA. That is in the state legislation. Also, no indoor structures or stadiums. So one thing that comes up a lot is the building of bathrooms. There may be a way to include bathrooms if it's a really big project that's mostly outside, but these funds can't be used to rehabilitate a bathroom space or build just a bathroom space. Sidewalk construction in the right of way. So if you have a park that has a sidewalk around the perimeter, that's most likely in the purview of DPW. And one of the things that the CPA really doesn't want to do is supplement DPW's budget when they should be maintaining those sidewalks. You could put sidewalks in parks, but they cannot be where DPW is maintaining. It also is a question of how permanent this investment is going to be. If we're building sidewalks or doing anything in the right of way that can be turned back into asphalt tomorrow, then that's not really a good investment into the community necessarily. We also cannot fund dog or horse racing facilities. So when it comes to open space and recreation, we could acquire land for use as open space or recreation. We could create open space or recreation opportunities. We could preserve open space and recreational facilities, and we could rehabilitate recreational facilities and open space land that was initially purchased with CPA funds. So some examples. This past spring, the planning department, together with the Greater Worcester Land Trust, acquired Brooks Dairy Farm, which is a parcel that has historical significance here in the city of Worcester, but ultimately will be was on the list of like high importance for preservation here in the city. So they requested 55 grand in CPA funds to finish that transaction. So that's going to be an open space that's available to the public with trails. The creation of open space, the Dr. Dorista Goldsberry dedication area and East Side Trailhead. It had by New Garden Park up near the Reactory development, is a new dedication area at the trailhead there to one of those trails going through Green Hill Park. The Roberto Clemente Park Improvement Project. This is in Great Brook Valley. So this is the Worcester Parks Department requested $1.2 million for that project and received it. And then a preservation project was the Cooks Pond Dam and Property Access Preservation. So Smith's Pond Corp., which is a community group that owns Cooks Pond, working with the Greater Worcester Land Trust to rehabilitate the dam, which is also access and a walkway through the property to allow access to water. And finally, some rehabilitation projects that were funded in the spring. The Fatty Jenkins Cage basketball court. Worcester Common Ground owns a basketball court on Piedmont Street that was in need of some renovation. And so they applied for some money from CPA and were successful to receive money to renovate that basketball court space. And Schwartz Baseball, a little league group, applied for 82 grand to restore Kendrick Baseball Field. So those are just some examples of projects that have happened here in Worcester so far, or currently underway. None of them have completed yet, but they were just awarded. Does anyone have questions on open space and recreation eligibility before I move on to community housing? I think I see one. Oh, you cannot unmute. Okay. So let's see if I could do something about that. Sorry, one moment, everyone. Let's see. Okay, so Jody, you have a question. I'm going to try and unmute you now. Maybe that's the best way to do it. If you want to be unmuted, just see if you can. All right, Jody, let's unmute you. What's your question, Jody? Oh, no, it didn't unmute. No. There we go. I'm so sorry. I'm not exactly sure why it's not going. Okay, thank you, Jody. I'm sorry about that. If you don't mind typing your question. I believe there is another question as well. Sarah, you've asked, to restore rehab, does recreation land need to be purchased with CPA funds to be eligible, or is this only open space? So in this case, you are able to restore recreational amenities. So this would be kind of like a playground or a basketball court. You don't need to have purchased those assets with CPA, but open space, if you were to purchase a farm, you can't necessarily rehabilitate that farmland using CPA funds unless the parcel was purchased with CPA funding initially. Okay. And I see that Jody is typing. You work at Friendly House, a nonprofit. We provide services to the community. It's an after-school program. So the playground would be eligible as long as the parcel that it was built on had a recreational or, yes, like a recreational restriction that was deeded to it. So the idea is that when it comes to recreation, we want to make sure that there is preservation of this investment for the community. We want to be doing right by the taxpayers. So we want to make sure that if we're building something, we're putting it on a piece of land that will always and forever be used for recreation. So if you're working in like a city park, for example, those parcels are protected under Article 97 of Mass General Law, which basically says that it's very difficult to take a park and turn it into anything that's not a park. But if you have a parcel or even a piece of a parcel that in the deed says, we're not going to redevelop this land for anything except for recreational use, then that space can be developed using CPA funds. Does that answer your question, Jody? And that's a process that the city of Worcester is willing to help you with. So let's say you have a property where you have a space that you were never planning to do anything with except have a playground in. The city of Worcester will help you through that process of converting that piece of your land into something that has what's called a recreational restriction. Oh, perfect. Well, then you're all set. You already have that recreational restriction there. And so that would be something that is eligible. And I see Sarah is still typing. I really apologize. I thought that I had it so that you can unmute, and I am having trouble right now changing that. Let's see. Okay, I think I'm able to make it so that everyone is just unmuted instead of can unmute if they want to. One second, give me 1 second. All right, I think I've changed it so that you are able to unmute if you would like. All right, one more chat question. Perfect. All right, Sarah, are you able to unmute now?
I am. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Great.
Oh, thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you. This is all incredibly helpful. I'm with Broadmeadow Brook Wildlife Sanctuary. Our wildlife sanctuaries at Mass Audubon are for wildlife protection and preservation and land preservation. However, we offer a plethora of educational, environmental education programming. We have summer camp. We have community public events and programming, school field trips, etc. So with all of that, I was wondering if you would know if we qualify under open space or recreation.
I think that Broad Meadowbrook would qualify under the open space unless you had a very specific area that you were dedicating to more recreational use, like a playground or a trail system.
We do.
You-
We do have trails. We have a network of trails open to the public dawn to dusk, and nature play space area, um, and summer camp that we host every season, where the grounds are used for educational purposes.
Okay. I think depending on the project, so when you apply, you would be
Mhm.
applying under open space and recreation. And when you submit your pre-application, seeing what the project is, I'd be able to provide a little bit more guidance under how it would be eligible there.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right.
This
I'm
is
going to
Ethan
jump
Brown.
into,
Oh, sorry,
oh,
just quickly,
yes.
sorry.
Hey, no worries.
I had asked earlier about access. So I'm with Worcester Public Schools and wondering about some of the schools would be looking at doing some work on their playground areas. So, but these playground areas are accessible to the public. Would that be considered recreational?
Yes, it would be.
Okay.
Yep. That would be a recreational project. So you could do rehabilitation on those.
And then one more question and I'll stop.
No, no
Would
worries.
it make more sense? Would the individual schools have to apply, or could this be a district wide, like if we focused on elementary schools or if we focused on middle schools?
Oh, that's a great question. So that would be either could, but I think depending on what the project is, I'd love to chat with you a little bit more on what you see the vision for that project to be to best position you for that application.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, but yes, either would be eligible. All right. I'm going to jump into the final category of community housing now. So community housing is really targeting low and moderate income housing for individuals and family, including seniors. So when we're talking about low income, it means 80% of area-wide median income or less, and moderate is 100% or less. And this is referring to HUD's definition of area-wide median income. And a senior would be someone who reached the age of 60 or over. So when it comes to projects related to community housing, you could acquire land or buildings to turn into community housing. You could create units of community housing. You could preserve community housing through projects like roofs and windows. You can support community housing pre-development activities. This is the only category where you can actually use monies to support. And I'll talk more about what that is in a moment. And then rehabilitation or restoration of community housing that was initially purchased with CPA funds. So if you're going to be doing rehab of a building, like installing new counters, new bathrooms and whatnot, that's really only eligible. You're only eligible if the building was initially purchased with CPA funds. And so the difference between that and preservation has to do with the nuances of those definitions. So preservation is protecting the building from harm. So roof, fire systems, siding, boilers. Those are things that are preservation of a house, where rehabilitation or restoration is more projects like, taking down walls or putting in new vanities and whatnot. So when we're talking about project eligibility for community housing, acquisition would be, we haven't had as many community housing projects. Well, we've had community housing projects in quantity, but not a variety. So we've had an acquisition project would be the purchase of a building to turn into community housing or a down payment assistance program. So you could have programmatic funds that help people acquire housing in those low and medium income categories. The creation of community housing is something like the construction of a deed restricted affordable duplex, like the work that Habitat for Humanity does all across the country. What we're doing here in Worcester when it comes to creation is that we are using our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is a separate grant program that targets, developers of community and affordable housing here in Worcester. And so the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is administered through the city of Worcester, but also has its own committee of Worcester residents that are well versed in affordable housing and what goes into creating affordable housing and are really best equipped to award these funds. And so if you have a project that is looking to create new units of affordable housing, we are going to steer you to the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust Fund here in Worcester. A preservation project would be, again, replacement of things like windows or entryway doors, and then support. Again, this is the only category you could do support is like engineering fees or preliminary design work to obtain zoning relief for community housing or something to that extent. Community housing is definitely a more technical category, but definitely a really important one here in the city of Worcester. Does anyone have any final questions on the community housing category before we move into how to apply?
Yes, for the community housing, is the term community, does it have to be a dwelling that's housing for multiple families or multiple individuals? For example, if you have a low-income elderly person, could they get assistance through this grant, or is the fact that it's a single dwelling or they're the only resident, they wouldn't qualify?
Oh, no, it doesn't necessarily look at the number of people living. I think they use the word community because it doesn't have as many technical definitions attached to it as affordable housing, right? But community housing is any creating housing for anyone at or below 100% area median income or a senior. That has to be permanent housing, so it can't go to transitional housing.
Yeah. And then the last question I have is, a lot of times if it is, say, a single dwelling, it's assistance with like a roof or a window, there's restrictions about sale of the property. Would that property need to be maintained by the owner for a certain number of years afterwards?
Yeah, so depending on the type of project, there would be some restrictions expected. So if the program were going to commit, say, $200,000 to the rehabilitation or the preservation, a new roof on an affordable complex, there would be an expectation that there would be an affordability deed restriction put on a certain number of those units for up to 30 years. And so the idea is that if we are using Community Preservation Act funds to invest into a building, we don't want to see that building turn into a building that's not serving that population. So we would be, with a lot of this work, there would be a deed restriction on affordability required as part of the grant agreement.
Thank you.
Yep. That questions? Okay. So how to apply? So I'm going to talk real fast about some of the changes that we had this application cycle compared to last application cycle. I do see that some folks here have applied in the past. So there are some big changes. One is that the application is now a two-step application. There is a pre-application, which is now open. And it's a really short form. The idea is to kind of let us know what type of project you're thinking of so that we can reach out to you with all the details that you need to consider as you're filling out your full application. We want to make sure that you're as prepared as possible to fill out the full application, your project is eligible, and so that you're not wasting your time if your project isn't eligible, or you're prepared to find the right documents to make the most competitive application that you can. And that hope is to reduce surprises for staff as well as applicants in the application process. So just knowing what to expect. So basically, once you fill out that pre-application, I'll review it. and then reach out to you and give you some information and answer any of your questions, and then send you a link to the full application if you're eligible. So it's not necessarily like, do you make it to the next round? Like, is your project good enough to make it to the next round? No, you just need to make sure your project is eligible, and then we'll make sure you get the link to the full application, where you'll be expected to supply those letters of support, a little more detail about the project, where all other money is coming from, and whatnot. So that's the big change this year, is the pre-application, and the pre-application is open now and will be until December 3rd. So you have to do a pre-application before you get a full application. You can't jump into the full application. So if you're interested in CPA funds, you need to fill out that pre-application. The second change is that the application timeline begins in the fall and is lengthened. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we're expecting the funds to be approved by City Council probably in the March timetable. These funds cannot be applied retroactively, so we are not able to backdate payments before March. So just make sure you keep that in mind when you're planning your project, that the funding won't be available until the springtime or late winter. So it is a little bit longer of a time scale than the first time around. The final change is the scoring rubric. This is a slight change. All the categories that were in the scoring rubric used by the Community Preservation Committee to rank the projects previously are the same. Just the weight of some of the categories have shifted based on some of the feedback that the committee received about how projects, the most important criteria in that rubric, and we'll go over that momentarily. As I mentioned, the pre-application is available. It's a virtual form. It's online at the Community Preservation Program webpage. That's worcesterma.gov/CPP. And you'll see a link there that will take you right to the pre-application. We also have right there the Community Preservation Act funding application form guidance for applicants. And this will just give you background information, what to expect, as well as all of the questions that you'll find in both the pre-application and the full application with the word count. The technology that we have right now for our application online is simple and efficient, but doesn't have the capacity to save an application. So I really encourage folks to write out their answers before they go in, paying particular attention to the word count. That way, once you have your answers done, you can go in, cut and paste them in, and then submit it all at once. So that's just something to keep in mind. And all those questions, again, can be found in the application form guidance. Application tracks. So these are just like the different ways to apply to the community preservation program. The standard application is really the one that most people are using. Almost all historic open space recreation projects and community housing projects that are not related to the development of homeownership and rental units. If you're creating new rental or home ownership units in your project, you're going to be going to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And 90% of the folks that are doing projects like that are developers and are familiar with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund at this point. And so we're not necessarily going to get into that, but if you do have questions, you could go to the webpage, you could reach out to me. But if you have a project that's related to a program related to down payment assistance or the preservation of affordable housing, those would all use the standard application. We have a special application process as well. This is still kind of under development, but the idea is that while we have this one, we had 2 application cycles this year, but in the future, we're planning on having just a fall application. If an opportunity comes up out of cycle, like a project to acquire or preserve property that's really time sensitive and can't wait for the whole application process to happen, or if there's like a historic asset that's damaged by a fire or a flood, there is a way that you can apply out of cycle for like kind of a emergency response or a quicker turnaround. But the threshold, not the threshold, you really do have to demonstrate that this is a time sensitive thing. We're not, because it does require meeting the CPC, getting everyone together really quickly to review the application. And so if it's not something where you can prove that like this opportunity would not be here waiting for the next application cycle, then we're going to steer you toward that standard application. So, what we're talking about now is really the steps that the standard application would go through, and pretty much the same forms would be applied to the special application process. It would just be out of cycle. So this is the flow chart. It looks like a lot, but we're going to go through it step by step, and it's really not that bad, I promise. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is really related to only historic projects, and that is the determination of local historic significance. So this is just determining if you have a property or a building that is on the National Register, which is the state register, which is basically an electronic database where they put historical buildings. If you're on there, you are automatically locally historically significant and you qualify for CPA funds. If you're not on there because you want to preserve a vote, or you have a building that just isn't on there but is historically significant, you need to get a local determination of historical significance through the Worcester Historical Commission. This is a really easy form. It can be found on the Worcester Historical Commission webpage. You fill out why this thing is historically significant locally. You send it into the planning department. You go on their next agenda, they discuss it, and they give you a determination. So you don't even have to go to the meeting. It's a fairly straightforward process. If you have questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me. So if it's not locally historically significant, the project isn't eligible for CPA. But if it is, you can move on to the pre-application. What I really should say is that because these historical commissions only happen every 2 weeks, you can apply, you could do your pre-application side by side with your request for historical significant designation, as long as you get the determination of local historical significance before the full application is due. So that's, again, just for historic projects that are not buildings on the historic on the State Register of Historic Places. So the next and first step for most folks is the pre-application. So this is a new step. This is the first step of the 2-step application process. It determines eligibility and establishes expectations around the whole process. It's a quick form you fill out on the City of Worcester webpage, and I'm saying now within 10 business days, I will get back to you and let you know if you're eligible, maybe ask a few more questions, give you some tips, and then if everything seems good, I'll send you the link for the full application. You can reach out and ask me questions until November 21st. And then pre-applications will be open until December 3rd. So if you have a CPA project, you need to get in the pre-application before December 3rd. You don't need to have final budgets. You don't need to have letters of recommendation. It's really just, this is my project idea. Here are some details about who owns the assets. Here's my general thoughts on the budget, what we're generally trying to do, and just acknowledging a few things. So you want to get that in, because then you've got the in for the full application. If it's eligible, you will receive the link via email from me, and you will be able to fill out that full application until January 7th at 11 a.m. And we won't be taking any applications after that time. And so you could reach out to me for any assistance up until December 29th. And you could try after that as well. I'm going to try and help you as much as I can. I just can't guarantee I'll get back to you in time for the deadline. So I just want to have that cut off to be safe and so that I can promise to you to get answers before then. So once you submit your full application, there's the CPC public hearing. So I'm going to take all those full applications that come in and I'm going to package them up and send them to the Community Preservation Committee. They're going to review them, and they're generally what they do is anyone who's eligible, which in this case it will be everyone because we'll have this pre-application process, you'll be invited to a public hearing. So the public hearings are going to take place the week of February 9th in the afternoon. The exact dates will be determined by how many applications there are. We don't usually want to do more than 15 in a night. So it's really a chance for the Community Preservation Committee to ask questions as well as the public. So this is a chance you could come virtually or in person, and you would give a brief overview of your presentation, and then the CPC, having read your application already, would ask you some questions, and then the public would be able to speak for or against your project as well. So if you have folks that you serve through your organization or partners that are really for your project, they could come and voice their support and why they think this is a great project to be funded by CPA. If your project is selected for funding at that point, so after all those hearings are done, the CPC goes home and they score all of the projects using the scoring rubric, and then they come back together and decide which projects they're able to fund with the $6 million. If your project is selected or recommended for funding, what happens is that we contact you, make sure you're still interested in that funding. It might be that they only fund part of your project, and so we want to make sure that if they only fund part of your project, if you're still able to move ahead with the full project, getting that partial funding, or if maybe just making sure that you're still on track to move forward with the project regardless. I'll contact you, and if you're still interested in receiving these funds, we will send a memo to City Council with all of the projects, and the City Council ultimately has the ability to affirm, reject, or lower the recommended projects. So City Council can't consider requests that don't receive a CPC recommendation, but they can reject or lower the amount that was recommended by CPA, the CPC. That hasn't happened. All the projects were accepted in the spring, but that is within their purview to do. And so once that happens and all the projects are accepted by City Council, you move into grant agreement phase. So this is where you enter a contract with the City of Worcester. Agreements contain requirements and expectations around, how the money is paid out, the reporting that you have to do as an organization. We want to make sure that you're able to report back your progress to the CPC, and then all the provisions for the grant compliance. And then you'll probably be submitting a few reports just to document the progress that you're making over the course of the project. And that's it. That is the process for the application steps. And so I bring up the timeline one more time now that we have a little more context. So October 29th, last week, we opened those pre-applications. Those will be open for 4 more weeks this week. Until December 3rd at 11 a.m. So get in your pre-app. As I receive the pre-apps, I go through them. I say within 10 days, but I'll try to get it much sooner to you, a response, as well as give you, if you're eligible, that link to the full application, which will be accepted until January 7th. On January 20th, the CPC will meet after reviewing the applications for the first time. They'll invite selected applicants to those public hearings. Once we know which applicants are invited to those will happen the week of February 9th. You are encouraged to go to those public hearings, but you could also send a representative to speak on your behalf. And then January 24th, that will be the meeting where the CPC will make recommendations to City Council. And then early March, sometime in that time period is when we'll send the recommendation to City Council for their approval. Before I talk about the necessary documents, does anyone have any questions on the process up to this point?
Hi, Jackie. This is Sarah again. I
Yeah.
did have a question on the grant term. How long is the grant term? Is it 1 year?
Oh, that's a great question. So right now, given that we're in our first years of CPA, the CPC has highlighted that they're looking to prioritize projects that like have a fairly shovel ready. With that said, I think anything up to 2.5, 3 years would be acceptable to them.
Okay, great. So just based on the project, you would work with the grantee on the grant term. And then my second question, and maybe this is really a question for a later info session, noting the match requirement listed in the application guidance. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Is it like a hard match requirement that would be built into the budget, or is it essentially just showing other funding sources?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we talk about match in the community preservation plan and in the scoring rubric, we're just talking about other funding that's going toward the project. And that can be private funding, that could be volunteer work, that can be another grant. It could really be anything. The CPC really just wants to one, know that the organization has support from other places for this project, and it's not entirely funded by CPC, the CPA. I mean, they wouldn't necessarily exclude a project that was entirely requesting CPA funds, but they do look more favorably on projects that have funding from other places as well. The other thing to consider is that the way that CPA funding works is that it's all reimbursement based. And so what that means is that our contract is with the awardee. So if there's a project the awardee is doing where they have contractors coming in and doing work, the awardee has to show proof of payment to the contractor before submitting for reimbursement from the city. And so making sure that an organization is in a financial position to be able to make that initial payment to the contractor is important too. And usually that's because of matching funds, not through matching funds, right? That they have that capital to make those initial payments, or at least some other form of cash that they're able to pay the contractor with. Understanding that there are small organizations out there that can't front an entire $100,000 project all at once. The CPP, the Community Preservation Program, will work with the applicants to create a payment schedule so you could kind of like hopscotch those payments to the contractor. So maybe they bill you for 10 grand, we reimburse you for 10 grand. And then you could use that to pay the next payment to the contractor, if that makes sense. I just covered a lot more than your question there, Sarah, but hopefully it also answers some other questions that may come up.
Yes, that is very helpful. Thank you so much. In that reimbursement invoicing post-award process, would we, with the invoicing and the reimbursement request, be required to show like a percentage of match, or it's really just on the pre-award side showing that we do have other funding sources funding the project to ensure that we're not only relying on CPA funding? Is there any sort of requirement in post-award to show match against a reimbursement request?
Not necessarily. As long as you are, the grant agreement will have explicit project items that are eligible for reimbursement. And if the project is moving along, the assumption is that those matching funds were able to make that happen, right?
Right.
So
Okay.
in the reporting, you're more than welcome to share as much as you want, but that's not necessarily a line item in the form as of now.
Okay. Thank you so much. Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions up to this point? Okay, so I just will run through now some of the documents you'll need for the pre-app. The first one is property owner's permission to submit. And if you're the property owner for where the project is going to take place, you don't have to worry about this. But if you are proposing to do a project on property that you don't own or don't yet own, you just need a note from that property owner that they acknowledge that you are proposing this project there and they're okay with it. So this is usually applicable in the case where you have like a friends of group that works in a park, needs to check in with the Parks Department and make sure that they're okay with you installing that amenity in the park, given that they're probably going to be, they're the owners of the park. So just property owners' permission to submit. And then a determination of local historical significance if your project is not, if is historical in nature and the asset is not on the state register. So this determination of local historical significance, you could submit with the pre-app, but you could also submit it with the full application. You'll need a project budget. It could be a very basic budget during the pre-app process, basically just like a total and what percent you think is you're requesting from CPA. You'll be asked for a more formal budget in the full application process, but kind of just giving us an idea of approximately how much you think this project is going to cost. When it gets to the full app, you'll need a proof of financial position. So this would be if you have match funding, like let's say you also have a grant from the state for a portion of this project. You know, you would submit that so that we know that when you say you have $100,000 from the state, that commitment is there. So support commitments and maintenance agreements. So this is to help make sure that the CPC knows that if you are proposing to build something, that there are contracts in place or some kind of commitment to continue to maintain this asset that's being built with community funds. Letters of recommendations are highly recommended, but optional. A project timeline is necessary. We want to get an idea of what, what are the steps and milestones that you see happening and when. And then, of course, permissions, permits, and plans. Some of these projects do require permits. And if you have those permits in place already, we would like to see them. So finally, I just want to go quickly through. I know that we are over an hour at this point, so I want to wrap up pretty soon and let you all go. But this criteria for project scoring can be found in the application guidance. It really goes through and identifies all the ways that you can score points on your project application. This is the form that the CPC is using to rank your projects. You could have a maximum of 34 points. And most of the categories you could have a maximum of 5 points in. So if you, I get in this presentation, which will be, well, I'll go through them now, I guess. So project preparedness is just referring to how ready a project is to commence if awarded. So the CPC is looking to see that public funds are committed to projects that have the greatest chance of being completed in a timely manner. So prepared projects demonstrate that you have permits in place, other funding that's necessary is already lined up, but also have a realistic timeline. So you could score between 0 and 5 points for a project that's prepared to move. Match funding is referring to those additional funds outside of the CPA ask. So leveraged funding, it can be from other organizations, it could be from the government, it can be in-kind donations to projects. The CPC encourages projects to utilize both CPA funds and other public and private funding. And the more of that, the more competitive your project will be. Applicant experience refers to the ability of the proposed manager for the project to complete the work in the presented timeline. So This doesn't necessarily mean that the applicant has to be very experienced in doing this work, but if they have a project manager that is experienced in this work, demonstrating their experience to keep this project on time and get it done is going to win you more points. Long-term sustainability refers to a project's ability to continue to serve the community for years to come. So that refers to either physical construction, a project that doesn't require a lot of physical maintenance, or that has a maintenance plan with commitments from organizations to take care of this asset over time. And so, you know, these are community funds. We want to make sure that the investment is going to be around for a while. When it comes to community benefit, this refers to, you know, the positive impact that a project has on Worcester residents. And so that could either be to the entire community or to a smaller, more vulnerable group of people that you're prioritizing. So a vulnerable group refers to like a segment of the population that's more likely to experience harm or discrimination due to factors beyond their control. And so just demonstrating that your project has community benefit to use these community funds is going to be advantageous. This is where the scoring criteria have shifted a little bit. We have community priorities and community planning and buy-in. They were moved into a category together. Community priorities refers to the priorities identified in the community preservation plan. So if you're aligned with any of these three priorities that were identified through that planning process, you will gain more points. So we're looking at increasing accessibility to historic resources, open space and parks, and in community housing. So that can be both physical accessibility, but also you know, just in other ways as well. We want to advance the city's sustainability and climate resilience goals, as well as prioritizing investments into projects that address a demonstrated need at a geographic area. So that basically means that if you align with one of those priorities, you will get extra points. And that ties into community planning. So all of those priorities came out of community planning. But if you have a project that ties into another community plan, say like the Vision Zero plan or some other plan in the community that was created with a lot of communal input, you could identify that, and that will also serve to gain you more points. Category goals. So these goals were goals that are identified during the community preservation planning process that are more specific to the different categories of open space and recreation, historic, and community housing. They could be found in the community preservation plan. They're here. I'm not going to go through all of them because there are like 14. So, but if you want to take a look at those, they're found in the community preservation plan. And if you have alignment with those, you can gain some extra points, as well as if you have more than one funding category addressed during your application. So if you have a project that is both a historic resource preservation project, but also an open space and recreation project, you hit all of those goals, you can gain an additional point toward your total for having that overlap, because you're hitting more of the spirit of what CPA is. Okay, I went through those really fast. So does anyone have any questions on any of the documents that you need for filling out an application, or any of the scoring that is done by the CPC? Oh, Patricia, I think you're still muted there. Yep. No. Okay. So don't feel like this is your last chance to ask. This is my contact down at the bottom, burmeisterj@worcesterma.gov. You could reach out to me with any question. We have our webpage here, worcesterma.gov/CPP, Community Preservation Program. You could visit the website to get to the pre-application. You could read the community preservation plan there and also the application guidance. And then this QR code will take you to our Community Preservation Program monthly newsletter. It's here where you'll learn about the CPC meetings that are coming up, when the applications are opening, as well as updates on projects that have been funded. We don't spam too much. It's about one newsletter a month, but hopefully enough to keep you informed about what's going on in the program. So thanks so much for coming today. I'm really excited to see what comes out of this next round of CPA funding. And feel free to reach out if you want a copy of the slideshow. And this video will also be posted on the Community Preservation Program webpage shortly. So yeah, thank you so much.